Conservatives can no longer vote like they used to. And the reason is that a group of elites, really misguided elites, promoting a neo-Marxist form of investing called ESG investing, which Justin referred to, have taken over the financial institutions that we all used to trust to invest our funds as prudent investors, not as political activists, and it's certainly not as leftist crusaders. Now, ESG, it sounds so innocent, right? What could be bad about environmental, social, and governance? It sounds pretty easy, sounds pretty innocent. But that's a ruse. That's a ruse to misdirect you from the fact that ESG investing is a total rejection of our founding principles. It's a threat to our democracy, it's a threat to our economic freedom, and it's a threat to our individual liberty. It's a threat to our democracy because these financial firms use it as a shortcut around the ballot box to enact these radical liberal policies that just aren't very popular. It's a threat to our economic freedom because they use their massive voting power to compel management of the companies in which they invest. And by the way, BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard, the three largest, if you combine their holdings, they're the largest shareholder in 80% of the companies in the S&P 500. And they use that massive shareholding power to compel the management of companies not only to implement these leftist policies, but to place the leftist policies above their obligation to generate returns for investors. And it's a threat to our individual freedom because the sons of bitches use our money to do it. They figured out how to use our cash to promote their values. In fact, according to one recent set of data, 74% of the companies in the S&P 500 are engaged in some form of liberal activism inconsistent with their obligation to generate returns for investors. This is really socialism in sheep's clothing. It's a tool that corporate and government elites use to convert the American public sector into a means through which they can implement their policies and avoid the messiness and inconvenience they find in our economic freedom, our free market economy, and our representative democracy. They do it by attacking the profit motive, right? The profit motive which is unique to free market capitalism. The idea that you can improve your life, you can profit through your own efforts. And it's really millions of people every day working to profit from their own efforts and having the opportunity to do so that drives this great economic engine that is the American economy. In fact, Barack Obama speaking in 2016, and I know you didn't think Andy Puzder would be quoting Barack Obama, but I'm going to do it anyway. He said in 2016 at Georgetown, the free market system is the greatest creator of wealth in human history and has lifted billions of people out of poverty. Well, ESG investing is an attempt to reorient modern corporations. So instead of being focused on generating profits, generating returns for investors, they're focused on implementing a liberal progressive agenda. Well, what idiot would take the greatest economic system in history and try and convert it into something that's been proven to fail in country after country after country? Well, the answer is it's a response that we hear throughout the history of socialism, which is that a group of elites think that they can run your life better than you can. All right, so what is ESG investing? Well, we know the E is environmental, right? It says radical environmental policies. If we've learned anything from the war in Ukraine, we've learned that those radical economic policies will destroy economies across the globe and millions of people will starve to death. It's the S, which Liz is going to cover. She's great on DEI, so I'm not going to cover this very much. But take, for example, critical race theory HR training, right? What Coca-Cola and Disney are doing, where you train your employees that they're either oppressors or oppressed. In other words, you train your employees to hate each other. I mean, I ran a company for 16 years. I would never have trained my employees to hate. That doesn't sound like that's going to motivate, a profitable company. And then there's governance, the G, which is also a little DEI in there. And this is where you put people on your board of directors or you hire executives, not based on their qualifications, their merit, or their character. You hire them because of their race or their sex. Now again, throughout my professional career, that seems like something I fought against, right? Martin Luther King, we want people to be judged by the content of their character, not the color of their skin. All of a sudden, that's not what we're fighting against. All of a sudden, ESG has made it fashionable to hire people based on their race or their sex. But it doesn't stop there, and Justin covered some of this, but for example, you've got companies out there now who were contributing to the defund the police movement. Black Lives Matter, defund the police. $90 million contributed to Black Lives Matter. How many of you wanted to defund the police? Well, I'll tell you what, if you've got a retirement plan or a 401k plan or even just an account with an investment advisor, I say the chances are about 99 out of 100 that you funded defund the police. Because the corporations in the S&P 500 that contributed $90 million to these Black Lives Matter people, so apparently they could go out and buy a bunch of nice houses, and then claim that they shouldn't be prosecuted or pursued because that was the system they were fighting, the system that would prosecute them for spending the money on things they weren't supposed to spend it on. But that's a whole other lecture. Leaving that aside, if you are invested in those funds, they use your money that could have been used to reduce the expenses of the company you invested in and therefore increase its value, or that could have been used to pay you dividends. This is your money that's funding defund the police. Or another thing Justin mentioned, said, companies, there's now 90 companies in the S&P 500 that announced they're going to send women to other states to have abortions if they're restricted in the state they're in. I don't know whether you're pro-life or pro-choice. It really doesn't matter. If you're pro-life, do you really think it's appropriate that companies would be taking your money? You've invested in these. This is your money, and spending your money to pay to move women to other states to get abortions. Even if I were pro-choice, I wouldn't want a company to do that. I'd want the company to focus on profits for me. So how do we get companies to focus on profits for us? Well, there's a couple of ways. One is Strive, which Justin has mentioned, and you invest in Strive, you'll be in the same products as what BlackRock invests in, but they will vote those shares differently. I'm the CEO, I'm not the CEO, I'm the chairman of a company called Second Vote. We also offer financial products. And by the way, Vivek and Justin and I, we're all very good friends. This is not like, we're like, Germany versus France in World War II. We're not at war with each other. But we offer alternative products. We offer 2 ETFs, exchange-traded funds, which you can purchase, easily. They're publicly traded. One is called Civil Safe Society, and if you invest in that ETF, you will not be investing in companies that want to defund the police or support open borders or oppose the Second Amendment, the kind of civil safe society type issues. We exclude them from our investment universe, and we have a pro-life ETF that excludes companies that support abortion. So these 90 companies that have announced that they're going to be sending women to other states would not be in that investment. In fact, 85 of them already weren't. So there's only 5, an additional 5 that were taken out of the investment universe. But the letters for that are LYFE, so EGIS and LYFE. We also have indexes. We have 4 indexes which are generally preferred by large investors, institutional investors. One of them is called Shareholders First. And it's a really interesting concept, and it directly addresses the ESG issue. In the Shareholders First, we only invest in companies that are politically neutral. We license and there will shortly be an ETF that's also Shareholders First, but right now it's just an index, so you'd have to talk to your broker and get a separately managed account. But with Shareholders First, we license research. There's this company that does a very detailed audit of every company in the S&P 1500, so the largest companies in America, small cap, mid cap, and large cap, and rates them. Either 1 is liberal, 2 is leans liberal, 3 is neutral, 4 is leans conservative, and 5 is conservative. The Shareholders First product only invests in companies that are 3, and there's a really interesting investment philosophy behind this. The philosophy is that companies focused on profits will be more profitable than companies that aren't. Everybody looks to me like I'm going to say something else after that, but that's really it. I ran a company for 16 years. I can tell you, it's hard enough to make a profit when you're focused on it. let alone when you're focused on trying to change the world consistent with some leftist political agenda. The other thing you can do besides investing with Strive or with Second Vote, and I hope you'll invest with both, but what you can do beyond that is go to your state legislators and encourage them to pass some legislation. I drafted a bill about a year and a half ago that we now have model legislation. It's been honed to a very sharp point by people at the Heritage Foundation and people at the American Legislative Exchange Council. So we have model legislation at Heritage and model legislation at ALEC. And this legislation makes it very clear that the fiduciary duty obligations in the state that passes this bill would prevent ESG investing because it was not in the monetary interest of the people on whose behalf you're investing. Now, every state already has fiduciary duty laws, and 19 attorney generals recently came out and said, hey, you know, these laws, fiduciary duty, they don't allow ESG. You have to focus on returns to investors, not on your political goals. And then BlackRock came out with like a lengthy response to that, saying that, you know, they thought ESG was completely consistent with fiduciary duties. And by the way, BlackRock has more money than God. They're going to hire the best lawyers in the country, in the world, and a bunch of them to come in and argue that everything they do is consistent with fiduciary duties. That's why this bill is important, because this bill makes it clear that it is not consistent with their fiduciary duties to invest based on ESG investment criteria. That, you can get all the lawyers in the world. If the law says that, the fight's over. The law also takes back, any state that enacts it will take back all of its voting authority. All the voting authority that's out to BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard, the state takes it back. It says, you can't vote our shares anymore. Florida, by the way, has already done this. We've been working with Governor DeSantis, and his people are spectacular. There's a very different, unique sort of setup in Florida where they can do that. There's one entity that controls all the state's funds, whether it's pension funds, hurricane funds. They're all controlled in one entity, and guess who controls the entity? Governor DeSantis. So we were able to pull back the votes. Florida, you don't have to worry about your shares in Florida if you're in a pension fund because the state can't vote them. The other thing that we've done in this legislation is we have a provision that says if you employ a proxy advisory firm, you know, as Justin pointed out, a lot of these states employ proxy advisory firms. If you employ one of those to tell you how to vote your shares, that proxy advisory firm has to agree to comply with the fiduciary duties contained in the statute. So there are ways we can address this. First of all, and most importantly, you should go out and invest with me and Justin. You should do that today. The second thing that's important is that you should encourage your state legislators to pass this legislation. Because I'm telling you, this is the biggest threat to your freedom and your liberty and our democracy in my lifetime. And I'm 72 years old. I actually did the math. This kind of surprised me. I've been alive for 30% of our country's history. I told my wife that, and I said, look, you know, either this means I'm really old or the country's really young. And she says, probably both. And she's probably right. But this is the biggest threat in my lifetime. And I'll include communism. Communism was always an external threat, right? The Soviet Union was always them. It was never us. This is an internal threat. This came from the United States. This has come up within. Now, it's spread out to Klaus Schwab and the World Economic Forum and Brian Moynihan at Bank of America and Larry Fink and every other, I don't want to use any adjective here that are inappropriate. How about evil? Any other evil people you can think of. But it started here. This is internal. This is a serious threat. There are ways you can act. There are ways you can react to this. I hope you'll do so. May God bless all of you, and I'm going to turn it over to Theo. Thank you very much.